want to welcome you folk to the program. We're just getting this television ministry going. We've been working on it for 5.5 years just to get the studios up and running. And so we have interesting stories that we want to share with you. And these are not just people that I heard about on the street. Daybreak Prison Ministry has been active in prison ministry in South Africa, UK, the United States, across Canada. And so you'll be hearing stories of lives being changed inside the institutions and then making it on the street and being a success in the community, getting businesses and their lives straightened out and families put together. So you're going to hear a lot of amazing stories because we've been at it for 45 years and there's a lot of stories to choose from. And so I have a guest with me today. And it's amazing. God has such a big family all around this globe. And we got to understand how big his family is. We think it's just our little church group wherever we're at, someplace on the globe. But it's so much bigger and how he brings things together. So I'm excited about our guest, Rod Williams. I was in the UK in 2015, in the middle of October. And I was over doing institutions in Scotland with Prison Fellowship there. And then through another friend, these are all connections that happen, through another friend who I had known since 1966, had married an ex-offender, and he had done 25 years. And so he came out and his life was changed totally. And so we started hooking up. That was 1978 when I first met Ernie Hollins. Then Sheila knew about Sean Verhey, who we will talk about and have interviewing this week as well. So Sean had helped to get interpreters to take Ernie's book and translate it into Russian so it could go across Russia and Ukraine and the Polish area and all that. So Ernie's book was getting over in Europe. So then Sheila got a hold of Sean and mentioned I was in the area, so Sean invited me down from Scotland, and I went to Warrington, Thorncross Prison in Warrington, where Sean is the chaplain. So I arrived on Saturday night. A gentleman picked me up that was volunteering with him and took me to the institution, and I was sitting at the front of the chapel, and the inmates were starting to come in. And this young fella came in, and I was had a book in my hand. I was sitting there in the front, and he came up to me and he said, "Hi." He said, "I'm Rod Williams, and you and I are going to be on Huntley Street next month." And I thought, I knew I was going on Huntley Street. That was middle of November, but I didn't know who Rod Williams was, but Huntley Street had already contacted him. And then 4 or 5 weeks later, here we are in Toronto doing 100 Huntley Street. Rod was there with his dad, Chris, and sharing their story. And I was with Kerry Newhoff, I believe his name was, the interviewer, and he was asking me about Daybreak Prison Ministry and stuff. So it's amazing how God pulled us together. And then to hear more and more of Rod's story, you're going to hear a lot of things on it. I want to show you his book. If I got this in the right place, here, left side. Okay, we'll get all this together. This book is the real deal. And Rod is going to be sharing some of his story and how amazing how God placed things in his life. And he's going to be sharing about his dad. He's going to be sharing about his sister. But he also wants to get sharing with you to encourage you if you're inside, encourage you if you're outside and needing help, that an ex-offender can come out and he can make it on the street. And he can keep his nose clean and not get in trouble and go back. And so we're going to approach Rod to share some of his story to get us going. Then we will get an address for you. If you want his book, we can put your address, give his address to you. And he's from Bradford, correct? Bradford,
England.
Bradford, England. And you can contact him directly and he can get a book off to you. It's a powerful book, powerful story, and we'll get going with it. Okay. Rod, is that a good enough introduction for you?
That's a great introduction, Royce, and it's
okay.
Fantastic to be here.
I'm glad that you joined us. These are all things that we're learning as we begin this here whole process. So, looking back, before you went to prison, okay, you started, well, you were in your home at that time, obviously. Your dad was a police officer, but can you get into some of your, you had a banking background as far as employment, correct? So
correct.
Tell us in that first part, your upbringing and some of the things you got involved. As I read through your book, you ended up meeting with different people that were working in the negative side of the street. Mm-hmm. And so would you share some of that story with us?
Absolutely, Royce. So yes, it's fantastic to be with you. Absolutely love this new initiative that you're doing. And my prayer is that it will bless many, many people's lives. And it's a real privilege to be able to share a little bit of my journey. And like I said, my journey, what I share will really bring hope to those that are listening, that are watching this interview. So I was actually brought up in South Wales. You might recognise a bit of a Welsh accent going on. So I lived in Wales till I was 10. Both my mum and my dad worked for the police force. My dad was a policeman for 30 years. My mum was a secretary to the chief of police in Swansea, South Wales. So from a very young age, I knew the difference between right and wrong in relation to the law. I was also brought up to go to church. So ever since I knew growing up, that's what we did. On a Sunday, we went to church twice, sometimes 3 times. So that's all I knew. So I was taught very, good Christian values and principles growing up. Unfortunately, when I was 4, my parents' marriage broke down. They separated, later divorced. So me and my older sister lived with my mum. But even though they separated and divorced, both my parents' relationship was, as amicable as it could have been, and they both remained healthy influences in me and my older sister's life. And then by age 10, both my mum and dad had married other partners, and they're still my step-parents today. And I must say that my step-parents have always been amazing, and they always have treated me like their own children. So I know that's not always the case sometimes with step-parents, but for me, I was really blessed, still blessed today to have amazing, supportive step-parents. So my mum married a man from a little island called Guernsey, which is just off the south of England and between the north of France. So Guernsey is part of the Channel Islands with Jersey and Guernsey. If you Google it, you'll see it. It's a very small island, 12 miles by 6, about 65,000 people population. And my stepdad had done really well. He had his own business on the island. He had a big house that wouldn't have looked at a place in Hollywood, lots of bedrooms and bathrooms, a swimming pool. So for a 10-year-old, it was kind of exciting moving to this beautiful island, this amazing home, and being in part of a really loving environment. Like I said, my stepdad treated me like his own children. I did the education thing in Guernsey, and during that time, sort of into my teens, I always wanted a job working in finance, in banking industry. That was booming on the island at the time. So that was really my goal. That was my focus, to do that. I went into higher education, where I got a qualification, a business studies qualification. And really, that was the time where I suppose I started to make some, maybe you could say, wrong choices. Up until that age, sort of 16, 17, I lived quite kind of a sheltered life. Up until that age, I went to church quite regularly. Even though I went to church for almost 16 years, I'd actually never made that decision myself, like my family had, to become a Christian. I didn't really get the God stuff. I only really went because I felt that it was the right thing to do to make my parents happy. But I never really embraced that myself. And it was around 16, 17. That's when I decided that actually church wasn't for me. God wasn't I wasn't really up for this God stuff. And that's when I started then to drift from church, drift from my friends, my church friends. And I started to make new friends at this college that I was going to.
So you had all this head knowledge, being raised in the church and the tradition of the church. You were getting all the news, but it wasn't going from your head to your heart. There was no relationship there.
There was no relationship there. And I think it's important for people to understand the difference, because some people think just because they go to church, that makes them a Christian, or they're born into a Christian family or born into a Christian country, that makes them a Christian. That's like saying if you're born in McDonald's, that makes you a Big Mac. It doesn't, does it? So I knew that I wasn't, because I've not made that conscious decision, and I've not repented and said sorry to God, and I've not embraced, the life of a Christian. So I knew I'd not made that decision, even though there were probably occasions where I felt moved during certain services, and maybe, God by his Spirit was working on my heart during certain moments. I believe that happened, but I would always harden my heart, and I'd be like, no, this isn't for me. I'm going to do my own thing. And that's what I started to do, Royce. At college, meeting new friends. On a Monday, my friends would come in and they would talk about what they'd got up to on weekends, house parties, drinking, experimenting with drugs, mainly smoking cannabis, weed at that time. And I was curious, and I put myself then in those environments. Not that my friends pressured me in any way. Absolutely. I don't blame any person for the choices that I made, because, sometimes that can be a bit of a cop-out. We make our own choices. And I put myself in those environments. And, very quickly I was doing what most of the other people were doing. I was drinking, I was experimenting with drugs, I was smoking cannabis, and I was enjoying myself. And I thought I was in control. And probably at that time I was in control. And then about 18 months later at college, I got my qualification, and I'm 18 now, and, doing the party thing on weekends. I didn't think there was an issue. And now I get a job in the bank. I get a job as a trainee accountant. So it was like, my dream job, getting a job in finance, earning good money for somebody my age. But it meant then that I had more money to spend on the wrong things. And I went into the pub scene. I went into the club scene because I was old enough now. And I started to take ecstasy tablets, and I started to take party drugs. And they became my drug of choice because they gave me this confidence that I'd never had before. Because in school, growing up, I was quite a shy person, to be honest. The only times I would sort of come out of my shell was if I performed a card trick, because I'm a professional illusionist, as you know, Royce. So I would do card tricks, and that would help me in awkward social moments, and sort of where, I would be able to interact with people. But now on ecstasy or whatever party drug I was taking, I had this confidence, and very quickly I was making new friends. And part of those, that my circle now of friends and acquaintances, that included people who were supplying drugs. Some of them became my friends. Then one particular night, Royce, I decided, I don't know why, I didn't need to, I decided to start selling ecstasy. And again, no pressure on me at all. But I took a bag of ecstasy tablets from a friend, and I said I'd sell them for him. And I got them cheaper. I was making £5 or equivalent to, say, $10, something like that, for each tablet I was selling. And I just saw the pound sign flash in front of me. I saw, this is an easy way to make a few extra pounds, dollars on the weekend. And I can do it, because I didn't think police would suspect me because of my job, because of my family's good reputation. Obviously, my dad being a policeman, nobody's going to suspect me. So I thought I had it sorted. And very quickly, considering the background I had, I embraced this world that promised me everything. It promised me power. It promised me pleasure. It promised me popularity. I would walk into pubs and clubs and people would flock to me because they knew I had something that would supposedly make their weekend better. And I got so much out of that power thing and being popular, because I never had really that in school.
Yeah.
And the money now was building up, the profits every weekend, more money. And all I wanted was more money. It didn't matter how much I made. I wanted more and more and more. So I would sell more drugs. I would take on selling anything really that I could get my hands on. But also then I started to gamble. So probably it was one lunchtime, a friend took me into the betting shops. I don't know what they're called over there. And I started to gamble, and I started to place bets on horse racing, dog racing, greyhounds. And I got addicted straight away. And I thought I could beat the betting shops. I would come up with schemes and scams and strategies to try and beat the betting shops, but it never happened, as you can probably work out. And between the age of 18 and 24, I lost about 150,000 pounds maybe gambling. So that's how strong a hold gambling addiction had on my life. So like I say, very quickly now, I'm 19 and I'm dealing drugs. I'm taking drugs. My mental health was being affected. And now I'm a gambling addict. Although at the time, if anybody had said you're an addict, Rod, I would not have believed it, because I was convincing myself that I was in control.
You're the last one that knows.
Exactly. Yeah. But everybody around me, especially my loved ones and my family, saw me destroying my life. I became unrecognizable to them. I found it hard to string a sentence together. I couldn't really converse with them because I was quite paranoid. Certainly the 2 or 3 days following a weekend of heavy drug use. And I was consumed, I was selfish. I was consumed by this world now, and that's all that mattered. Of course, deep down, my family mattered, but, that was crowded out because of this world that I was embroiled in. And into my early 20s, I started to import drugs into the island. And, they weren't massive scale importations that you read about in the paper, like the millions of dollars. It wasn't anything like that, but it was still a lot of money, and it was still crime. I was still doing things that weren't right. And a lot of the time then, all my dealings was to get back the money that I'd lost in the bookies, because I was getting in debt. I was getting in debt with drug dealers. So anything that I was doing was to make up the money I was losing in the bookies, or money that I needed to pay my suppliers. So I'm in just this vicious circle, this cycle, still working in the bank, living two lives. As soon as payday came from the bank, I would either lose it in the bookies, or I'd have to pay my dealers straight away. So I was always trying to scheme and scam. And by this point now, I started to hate and dislike my life, and this was sort of 2021, and the person I'd become, and I was getting involved with all sorts of dangerous people, and by this point, the police in the island. My dad had retired by this point, and he was a policeman in Wales, so. Even with his police connections, he would still come over to the island, and he would meet with me, and he would say, "Rod, I know what you're doing." And he said, "If you continue to do what you're doing, you're going to end up either in prison, in hospital, or 6 feet under," because he saw that through his work every day. So my decisions were concerning my loved ones. And that's what happens, doesn't it, Royce? Our choices, our parents, our loved ones, our family have to live out the consequences of our choices. So my choices were robbing my family of their freedom. They were worried. They were concerned, robbed them of their peace. My mum, she would have many sleepless nights because she'd be worried about, what I was doing, who I was doing it with, and whether the next knock on the door would be the police again. And I say the police again because my parents' house had been raided on a few occasions because I was getting arrested on suspicion of being involved in certain drug deals where friends of mine would go to prison, and obviously your name gets brought into the mix somehow, and because you're involved, and so they, police would raid my parents' house during one of those. Go on.
Your actions begins to haul your family in on it.
Yes.
Like their homes, it gets disrupted.
Yeah, their whole lives were disrupted because of me and my choices.
Yeah.
And yeah, I got a minor drugs charge where I was in court during that time. It was for personal use. It was a couple of ecstasy tablets and a small amount of cannabis. I got a fine. I was named and shamed in the paper, and I was 22. At this point, still working in the bank, believe it or not. And my boss gave me a second chance. Well, he gave me quite a few chances, really, and he offered help, and he said, "Okay, we're going to give you another chance, Rod," which was really, really nice and considerate of him, and a lot of grace. And but I didn't really take it because at this point I was started to use heroin. So you can see sort of that journey, that sort of deterioration, 17, sort of smoking, experimenting with weed, moving on to party drugs, ecstasy, amphetamines, bit of cocaine. And now by age 22, sort of 23, moving into 23, I started to take heroin. And it was more of I'll have a go. I'm not going to get addicted. I'm in control. But I got addicted. And there was probably about 15, maybe 20 of us during this time that were experimenting with it. And we all got addicted. And there's probably only about 10 of us maybe that are alive now because of that. We're not going to get addicted. We'll be okay. But we did. And as any heroin addict will tell you that, you take heroin because it numbs, it's a painkiller. It numbs the pain that's going on inside of you. So the reality of of how messed up my life was, the pain that had caused my loved ones was numbed when I was on the heroin. So
it's numbing the emotion. It's numbing the emotional side.
Yes,
yeah,
it does. And that's what it does. It numbed the emotional side, and it helped me escape into this world where it seemed everything was going to be okay. So that was that deterioration. Then, over 12 months from when I started smoking heroin, I lost everything. I was losing everything anyway, but now there was just a acceleration of loss. I lost a house that I had a mortgage on. I lost my job because I was smoking heroin in the toilets. I just lost a lot of decent relationships and friendships I had because I became uncontrollable and people couldn't help me. And I left the island of Guernsey. I went to try and sort myself out in places like Thailand and became addicted to methamphetamine over there. And then in early 2002, that was probably my rock bottom place, Royce, when I was in this crack den in London, a place called Brixton. At the time, it's quite notorious for gangs and that drug culture, and especially heroin and crack cocaine. And I started to take crack cocaine. So I was addicted now to heroin and crack cocaine, spending thousands and thousands and thousands every week, sending drugs back to Guernsey to pay for my habit. And I'm living in this squalor. And I remember waking up one morning, Royce, after a heavy night of drug use, and I'm in this squalor. There was about 7 or 8 other people there. They were all crashed out on the floor. And I stood up from that, my sort of that place I was in, that living room, that squalor. And I remember just looking over at the sea of bodies that were all crashed out on the floor. And the reality hit me as this thick darkness hit me about how messed up my life, my situation was. And I saw all the drug paraphernalia. I saw stuff that I don't even want to talk about. And it just hit me, and I started to cry. I remember tears streaming down my cheeks, and I walked out of the house and down the street because I needed to get out. And I just wanted help. I wanted out. I hated the person I'd become. And that, I would say, my rock bottom, that was when I started to really hate and detest everything about my life. And that was the time where things started to change in a different way, where I started to want help. But I needed to do something first, Royce. I needed to pay a debt off. So I owed one of my suppliers it was only £8,000. I don't know how much is that in Canadian, but it wasn't a lot of money compared to what I'd paid him. But he gave me 1 week to pay the debt. Cool. And the only way I could pay the debt, yes, and he threatened me with a knife and baseball bat. And the only way I could pay the debt was to take drugs on me, myself, courier, and take them on the plane to Guernsey from London. And I just thought that I could do it. I'm not going to get caught, and I'll be fine. I'll pay the debt, and then I'll sort myself out. So in a way, I thought this was going to be my way out, my get out of jail free card. This is my journey to freedom now. and I was excited about it. I was nervous, but I was excited about leaving that lifestyle. Whether it would have happened, I don't know, but I certainly had that desire. Anyway, long story short, Royce, I had 2 packages of one heroin, 1 crack cocaine, enough to pay the debt. That's all it was. It wasn't a big scale thing. And I got caught. I got caught at Guernsey Airport. Customs police were waiting for me. They knew something was up. And I was with a friend. We both got arrested. I had the drugs on me, the big amount of drugs. And that's it. I was banged to rights, and I was arrested. I was taken to what they call the customs sheds in Guernsey, where I was 2 or 3 days, and I was interviewed and then charged. And then I went to prison. I was remanded in custody until the court case, and that was the best thing that could have happened to me. That was the best thing that could have happened to me, and that's when things started to change.
So when you were sentenced, this would be your first time going inside.
Yes, that's right, Royce. So this is my first time in prison.
A first time. So coming out of a nice home that you were raised in, now you've got no control because the system now controls you. So what was it like when you were first going in? How did you adjust first time going in?
Yeah, so I was. It was an emotional roller coaster. Obviously, I had to withdraw from the drugs, so I had that going on as well, and it was literally cold turkey. I think they gave me a couple of sleeping tablets, and that was about it. And yeah, I had in my head that this was going to be my abode for the next 4 to 6 years. I'd worked out in my head it was roughly going to be that. So I had all that going on. I had the reality of sort of going through, feeling the pain that my family now were going through, having heard just what happened. So I was going through all those kind of emotions. Guernsey prison's a very small prison, and I probably knew half the people in there. There was only 55 inmates, so very small, and I knew everybody. But fortunately, I'd got on with most of those people, so they were my friends. So in a strange sense as well, that did help me settle into this, what was going to be a crazy environment for a couple of years. But to be honest, I knew deep down it was the right place for me to be in, and almost felt a relief as well. And I almost started to feel a little bit of peace now in my heart. And what happened, Royce, was that I started to speak to my family again. And my mum and my dad, they were there for me. A lot of people were still a bit, unsure. Because when you come from that background and you make those decisions and you're in addiction and you're criminal, people write you off, they disqualify you. Yeah. A leopard never changes its spots, that kind of stuff. And they almost disqualify you from ever having a second chance in life. So now my family were there for me, and they really, were encouraging, and they were like, Rod, you can't change your past. My mum said to me the first time I spoke to her, but she said, Rod, you can change your future. And she said, will you just do one thing? I said, what's that? She said, will you give God an opportunity to show himself real to you?
Yeah.
Because he's the only one that can change your life. Nobody else but Jesus Christ. And I started to think of what she said.
So you're hearing this from your mom.
Yes.
There's a lot of people I've worked with over the years. They never had encouragement from family.
No.
And yet there's a lot of people that have, and it's still a choice that you have to make.
Absolutely. It's still a choice.
Yeah.
That addiction isn't a respecter of person or your upbringing. We can make unwise choices, and a series of unwise choices that takes us into that world. So quite often it's not, because of your background or upbringing. It's just because sometimes we can make some, unwise choices that end up on this path that we've not outright in life intentionally chosen.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's just carved out because of our wrong choices. So my mum, my dad, they were forgiving. And throughout this time, they prayed a lot. They were Christians. So they had faith. They believed that one day that God would intervene in my life. So they didn't stop praying. And I want to encourage, if you're somebody who's got a family member addiction in prison and you can't see anything happening, don't give up hope.
Yeah.
My parents didn't give up hope. They prayed, they believed, they stood on God's word, and they drew peace from that as well. And and they just let God did what he ended up doing. And I'll tell you about that now, Royce.
Sure.
So I'm in prison. And my mum and dad sent me in testimony books similar to the one that I've written myself. And I started to read books like The Cross and the Switchblade and Run Baby Run, very popular testimony books. And I started to read these stories of gang members and drug addicts, prostitutes, being, their lives who were ravaged by extreme addiction and violence. And I was reading that along on their journey, these individuals had encountered Jesus Christ. And I was reading about how this encounter had radically transformed their lives. They were getting set free from their addiction. They had the power and strength to walk away from the gang culture. They started to feel this peace and love in their mind and their heart that they'd never experienced before. And years on, now I'm reading that they're helping other people, making a difference. And in a sense, I was getting quite emotional reading these stories. And I believe God, by his Spirit, was speaking to my heart, almost saying, Rod, what you're reading about with these people, this can be your reality. Mm-hmm. There is power for you to change. You can be forgiven. You can have a brand new start. There is hope. All these things that in life people need to hear. And I start to almost believe that there might be something in this thing called Christianity. And I went on a journey up there thinking, is this Jesus really the real deal that I'm reading about? And could he do that for me? And anyway, 3 months into my sentence, June 2002, I decided to see if this Jesus was real. And I got it down on the floor in my pad cell after being locked up. And I just started to pray, and I started to cry out to this God if he was there. And I probably cried my heart out for about an hour, just saying, God, if you're real, will you show yourself to me? Jesus, if you did really die on the cross so that I could be forgiven and have this peace and have this brand new start, I really want it. Will you forgive me? And it wasn't a crisis prayer.
So, Rod, you weren't in a chapel setting. You weren't in a church setting. This is an inmate struggling with God if you're real, and it's you and him having a conversation.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it was. Exactly as you've just said that. It was me and God having that conversation, and me coming to that place of just being honest and vulnerable. And almost, I was ready to make that step. I wasn't forced. I wasn't pressured. This came from me. And I think that's really important for people to know that, you can't be pressured or forced into making a decision for God. You have to But the key thing is my heart was open. And I believe having that open heart, God was able then to take me on that journey to where I was now on my floor, like that, crying out to God. When I stood up from my pad floor, I knew straight away that something supernatural had happened. I felt a peace and I felt a love, an explosion of love fill my heart that I'd never experienced before. And I just knew that my future was going to be different. And people say, how did you know? Because I didn't have a vision of Jesus. There weren't bright lights that filled up that cell, but I knew a miracle had taken place in my heart. I just knew. And it's because hope invaded my world. And that's that. When you experience hope like that, even though I had prison bars, physical bars around me externally, those internal bars had been completely destroyed. And that's why now I had this peace. And I still had 15 months of my sentence to do. But it was like, I wasn't bothered. It was like, because I had this newfound peace. And I started to read the Bible. I started to get understanding of this decision I'd made. There was a Bible on my shelf, Gideon's Bible. And that really helped me understand this decision that I'd made. I started to read the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And because God speaks to us, as you know, Royce, when we read the word's probably the most, and prayer, two most important things we must do as Christians. So I started to read the Bible. God was speaking to me through the Bible, just scriptures jumping up, but exactly when I needed to be assured that God was for me, that he loved me, that he had a plan for my life. I started to pray, and I just started to, it's funny, when we pray, things happen. When we don't pray, they don't. And it's true. And
that sounds biblical.
Very biblical.
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah.
And so seeing, God doesn't always answer our prayers in our timing, but he always does in his timing. And I think that's the key. That's the thing you learn as a Christian. But I think initially when you're a baby Christian, God just likes to accelerate those prayers, just for you to see that actually he is there. And I saw I had quite a few of those moments, and that was just to encourage me on my journey. But so that night, I became a born again Christian. That night I cried out to Jesus. That started my adventure with God. And I wrote letters to my parents, telling them what had happened. And obviously they were encouraged. They sent me some obviously books to help me, connected with the local chaplain, which is really important, chaplaincy. And there were groups that would come in from different churches, and they were very helpful as well. But I'm still in prison, and I'm still, I'm not. There were still areas of my life that still needed to be fixed, because that's a reality. And I'll be honest with you, it was tough. It was tough being a Christian in prison. It's tough being a Christian outside of prison, but certainly in prison. And I fell flat on my face on a number of occasions. I still use on occasions. I messed up. But the thing that I want to encourage people with is that, God was still there for me. He didn't write me off. And I think some people give up, especially on their spiritual journey, when they perhaps mess up or continue to fail or whatever that is to them, that they almost think God's given up on them. But I want to encourage people that that's not the case. God is a God of the second chance and the unlimited chance. It doesn't matter how many times we mess up, foul up, fail. God, his love's unconditional, and he's always there when we respond and come back to him and obviously repent, say sorry. And it's like, okay, let's keep on going now. And God will continue to pour his love, grace and mercy. And those times of falling and failing just become less and less and less and less. I got out on parole after 16 months, just thought I could do it by myself. I had opportunities to go to like a Christian rehab called Teen Challenge, but I decided not to because I can do this by myself now. It was still early days.
Yeah.
And I ended up reoffending. I ended up going back to prison within 6 weeks. And that was a real shake-up moment for me because, again, that reality hit me. I can't do this by myself. I need to humble myself and embrace that support when I get out, and really trust God with my life. So, long story short, God did some miracles during that time, that second stint, finishing my parole, where he opened the door for me to go to a Christian rehab, and where I got released early again on second parole, which was the first time that had ever happened in that prison. So that was a miracle that I got released twice on parole to go to this Christian rehab in England. So I had to get on a plane by myself, which they'd never done that before as well, especially because during my parole, the offence I got, one of the offences I did was I escaped from police custody. And only a few months later, they're letting me fly on a plane by myself to go to this rehab. And it's like, only God can do that. And I ended up going to a rehab, and that was the start of an incredible journey then or an accelerated journey of rebuilding my life in the right environment with the right people, and just seeing, just the last 20 years being on this adventure with God since. But before we'll come to that in a moment, when I got out of prison, but I just want to touch on, Royce, I think you mentioned earlier, before we did this, about my sister, Emma, being a prison officer in the prison. And so what happened was, when I was out on parole, obviously my family didn't think that I would ever reoffend or go back. So during that time, my sister got a job as a prison officer, and she had done the training just before I got out. So they knew I was getting out, so that wasn't a problem. But obviously, I ended up going back into the prison, and now she was working there. And literally, she had to open me up when she was on the same wing, when she was on shift, and she had to lock me up. She even stood next to me in court the day that I was having my parole license revoked. So she just happened to be the officer on the day where she would stand next to me in the dock. So I'm standing there, and she was next to me as an officer, taking me back to the van. And you can't make this stuff up. It was just one of those bizarre situations. And, but God brought real healing between me and my sister, because it took a lot longer for my sister to come round, because of the pain she saw me cause, a lot of my family, my mum, my dad. So my sister, took her a lot longer to come round. But it was a different dynamic now, although it was embarrassing for me. My sister having to lock me up. We ended up having a great relationship. And we ended up getting on better during that time of me in prison than we had done for a number of years. We probably got on the best we'd ever got on in our lives. So only God can do that.
Yeah, that's good news. For you
that's
to
great
have her
news.
in there and to develop that relationship as well. She obviously has seen changes in your life.
That's correct. Yeah. Yes. So it's just one of those moments that it's just one of those bizarre moments. Obviously, my dad being a police officer, my sister being a prison officer, and just part of this crazy story.
Your mom being the secretary for the chief of police?
Chief of police in South Wales. So that's it. I get out of prison then in June 2004 to start this program in this Teen Challenge-like place called the Lighthouse Foundation, in a little town called Widnes in Cheshire in England. And I started this program. And like I said, this was a healing home. This was a space that I was given, where I had 24/7 support. I had, in a really healthy environment where I could rebuild my life, with the right people and no distractions, no mobile phones, nothing like that. So it was a real blessing. And then yeah, so that I was on this program. We had daily Bible studies. We would have prayer meetings. I had my own quiet time every day that I could, spend time with the Lord and really get more of that. Yeah, just understanding of that personal relationship that we can have with God. That, it wasn't a religious relationship. This was a real personal relationship with my friend Jesus, because that's what Jesus says in the Bible. He wants to be our friend. He's a friend of sinners. And also, understanding the father heart of God as well. That actually God is our father. And a lot of people don't have an understanding of what a perfect dad is, because that's not been their experience. But we can with God. He's the perfect dad in heaven that wants us, when we become Christians, we become his children, to have that sort of that father-daughter, that father-son relationship. And that's what really, when you have that sort of understanding and revelation, that really changes your heart. And so I'm on this exciting journey now, really understanding my identity, who I am in Christ, but also seeing my future. So, I had started to have this strong desire to want to help other addicts and people who found themselves in a similar place. And after I graduated from the program, after 16 months, I got a job as a support worker there, Royce, helping other addicts. It was a full-time paid job. And again, it was just one of those perfect timing roles, because a month before I graduated, one of the staff members left to move to America, and there was that job came up at the right time. And that, I think that there's a verse in the Bible that says, when we seek first God's kingdom and his righteousness, he adds all these things to our lives. And I believe when I was at the lighthouse, the best to my ability, that I made that decision to put God first, to pursue him, regardless of what was going on, that he was going to be first. And that really made that difference. And I began to see these things being added. I got a job, started a relationship with a girl who was in the church I was going to. We've been married 18 years, 17 years now, which was a miracle as well, especially with her dad being a crime prevention officer. So that was another one of those God moments that is you look back on and think that's quite funny.
So you got out in 2004. So
that's
you're
correct.
20 years now.
20 years.
Yeah. And so you and your wife got married, and you mentioned that you and your wife have adopted. You have a 6-year-old daughter. Is that right?
Absolutely. So that's, another one of those God moments. So about 7, go on, carry on.
I was just going to say you're having a lot of those God moments.
That's right. Yes. And this was one of those as well. So after working for the rehab for 4 years and just being able to help a lot of people in addiction, God using my mess and turning it into a message, because that's what he does, doesn't he? He uses our mess and turns it into a message. And I just want to encourage those watching this, that whatever mess you found yourself in, God wants to use that mess. He wants to turn it into a message so that you can help other people, regardless of what that thing is. You can help somebody, but sometimes we need to be cleaned up ourselves, and that's what God does best. So after working in that rehab, I worked then for a charity that helped people out of debt, financial crisis. I did that for 13 years. Very evangelistic charity. So we would work with people in the community, help them out of debt, financial crisis, but then offer the love and support of the local church. And through that time, we saw hundreds of people and families, thousands actually, not just get debt free, but also find a relationship with Jesus Christ, because they saw authentic Christianity in action. Yep. And they were like, this is real. We want what you've got. And many of them came to church. They became Christians, got baptized, and still in church on that discipleship journey ever since. So, God uses those moments, to reach into just the darkness in people's lives, what they're going through, to offer hope And because that's the message as Christians we get to carry. It's a message of hope. And in relation to the adoption journey, that's what me and my wife were able to offer: a baby girl that was given up at birth, that was relinquished by her parents because she had Down syndrome or has Down syndrome. And her parents didn't know during the pregnancy that she had the disability. So when they found out, within an hour or 2 hours, they decided they weren't able to give her the support that she needed. So they gave her up for adoption. And about 18 months previously, my wife, felt it was right for us to maybe go through or look or explore to adopt ourselves. And we prayed about it and felt it was right. And then my wife had a picture one night of this baby that had this sort of this t-shirt or bib on that said, keep calm, it's only an extra chromosome. And the next day she actually saw that same image she has seen the night before in her head. And God obviously gave her that picture. That's how God speaks to us in one of the ways. And then Kate, my wife Kate, felt that God wanted us to adopt a child with Down syndrome. And that was a decision we made very quickly that was right. So we went through the adoption process. I got approved to adopt after 12 months. And when you think about my drug convictions and me being in prison, again, another God miracle. The Bible says that God opens doors that no man can shut. If it's God's will, it will happen. It will always happen regardless of whatever mountains you see in front of you. If God's involved, it'll just happen. And so that was a real celebration. And then 6 months as we were waiting to hear if this was possible, whether we could adopt a child with Downs, we got a phone call from our social worker saying, a baby's been born, she's been given up, and we'd love you to see the little baby. She's a girl, she's 4.5 pounds, she's in hospital, she's going to be in there for a few weeks. So that's it. We met her, little Chloe, and that was it. We spent 2 weeks in the hospital with her, and we took her home, and the rest is history. She's 6 now. She is amazing. She's a miracle from heaven. She brings a lot of love and joy everywhere we go, and she is a superstar. And like I say, God had orchestrated it. He knew before the foundations of the world that we would have Chloe, prepared us for it, and she is absolutely incredible, and she just shines just so much love and light everywhere she goes, and she's going to have a lot of impact on a lot of people's lives, absolutely, in the future.
Well, you coming and sharing this information, starting in your cell, as far as you starting that conversation with God, you began to see the mess you were in, and you needed his help. And now you've been out for 20 years, and the way things have changed, you got yourself straightened out, you got married, you have your child. So your ministry now is taking you pretty well around the England area, or are you up in the all of UK? Where's your ministry taking you now?
Yeah, so all of the UK, really. So when my book was published 10 years ago, obviously when we came to Canada and we connected, we were on Huntley Street together. That was just soon after my book had been published. So I set up Real Deal Ministries then at the same time. And what that does, it means that it gives me an avenue into prisons in the UK. So a lot of what I do now, I still do a lot of outreach events for churches. So I'll go to churches, I'll share my story, and obviously evangelistic. We do that across the UK, but also get to go into prisons as well. So I'm going into a prison this Sunday where we met, Thorncross. So I'm excited about that. And just to share my story and to encourage the lads on their journey. Sometimes I'll go in and do Bible studies. I do fundraising to get my copies of my book into prisons. So anything like that, whether it's a prison, a young offenders, a rehab, I go into school sometimes. Wherever that takes me. And, that's my heart, being on this mission with God, whatever he wants me to do, I'm up for it. And he's just, obviously, he's using my story to sort of, to inspire and encourage people, to bring hope and healing. And so that's exciting. So through Real Deal Ministry, I get to travel around doing church stuff. I'm involved in other sort of Christian ministry areas as well, when I can. So a bit of an entrepreneur. And I get to connect with a lot of people, and through those connections get to encourage people on their journey, whether they're a Christian or not. And that's the key. It doesn't matter where you are on the faith journey. People need to know that they're loved, that they're worth something, that they're valued, and that there is a God that genuinely cares for them and wants a relationship with them, and that they can have that relationship. And perhaps their experience of church Christianity in the past, which maybe has been bad or negative, that happens quite a lot, that actually they can experience God in a different way and maybe get a different perspective from what they've had in the past. And I see that happen a lot as well.
Well, it's a powerful story. Your testimony is a very powerful story. And I thank you, knowing you since 2015 when we first hooked up, and to see things, how it's come together for you. You haven't changed in your personality as when I met you that first time. Then when I met your dad at Huntley Street, and then we went out and had lunch and that together. Then we stayed hooked up all these years. And I thank God for your life. I thank God for your family, because that helps you with your stability as well, having a home life and being able to take this story and share it. That lets people know inside the change can happen. But we come back to what you were saying at the very beginning. It's a choice.
Yes, absolutely.
I got to make that choice. And so even when we get into the addictions, the third step on a 12-step program, whether it's AA or whether it's Celebrate Recovery or Overcomers, the third step will always say, I turn my life and my will. Not just my life is my mess. My will is, what do you want me to do? And I turn my life and my will over to him. And so when we hear what has happened to you, not in a church setting, you were in a cell and you were having a very personable conversation with him, because you said you were there for an hour and just crying before him. When we start taking a look at the love that God has for us, even in a prison cell, he already knows the mess I'm in, and he starts piecing it together so I can walk out of there and stay out of there. You had a few slips, like a lot of us have a few slips, but God is always there to turn around and say, let's try it again. Go back at it.
Exactly.
Yeah. And as far as your card tricks, I remember we were at the restaurant at the hotel we were staying in. I have a picture of the young man that was serving us, and he had come over to the table, and you got your cards out and you started doing your illusionary stuff and flipping the cards and all this here. And he was amazed, and then you handed him a book. And so when I got the picture of him, where am I at now? Here I am. Okay, there we go. Got to get all these cameras straight. When you handed the book to him, he had his thumbs up. I got the picture of him.
That's right.
So you're open to share the story, not just inside the institutions, because people are people inside and outside. They still need that relationship, not in the head, but down in the heart. That's where the change comes. That's where we feel the love. And that's where we turn more over. As you were saying, he's a good father. And a lot of people haven't had a good father. And so to understand the love he has for us, and he does have a plan for you and your wife and your child, and he's got a plan for each individual that's hearing the story that you just shared. I thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Royce. It's been a real pleasure.
Only Jesus, only Jesus, only Jesus can set the captive free. Break the chains of sin that bind, free the free.